Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on dietary management of gout, science or fiction. I'm Terry Abanchik, the Member Services Manager here at Arthritis Action. I will be the modulator for the webinar today. With me is our host, Martin Lau, our Dietitian and Service Manager at Arthritis Action. And our expert speaker this morning is Dr. Lorraine Watson, who is the Dietitian and Clinical Researcher at Keele University. Just a little housekeeping message that if you would like to ask any questions at any point during this webinar today, please make use of the Q&A box below. The speakers will answer as many questions as possible till the end of the webinar, but we will endeavour to answer any questions that you have at the end of the talking. And if we don't have time at the end, we'll respond to them in writing within 2 to 3 days after this webinar. Finally, I'd like to remind you that this webinar is not intended to be a substitute for medical advice. Always seek the guidance of your doctor or other qualified health professional with any questions you may have regarding your medical condition. So over to you, Martin.
Thank you, Terry. Right. I'm really excited today. Morning, Lorraine. Thank you so much for joining me today. I know that I've been hounding you about doing this webinar for a while now. Now, even though that you have written an article for us in our magazine, is it possible for you to tell us a little bit more about yourself and your fantastic work, please?
Yeah, so hi everybody. Thank you, Martin, for inviting me. And it's great to be talking this morning. Yeah, so as we mentioned at the beginning, so I'm a NHS dietitian. So I've been a dietitian for over 20 years, probably over 25 years, working in the NHS. And I've worked in lots of different areas. But I'm employed as a research fellow at Keele University as well. So I work in the School of Medicine there, so undertaking research. And I undertook a PhD which looked at gout and quality of life and flares over time. And I'm currently funded by the NIHR School for Primary Care Research, and we're looking to develop lifestyle interventions for gout. But as we said at the beginning, what we talk about today is we're talking quite generally. It's not to replace any healthcare advice. And even though I'm funded by people and I've sat on different committees as well, I'm really sharing my own views today. So I'm really looking forward to talking to everybody.
Fantastic, thank you. So without further ado, I will get right into our topic today. So Lorraine, what exactly is gout, please?
So globally, gout is the most common inflammatory arthritis. And the percentage of people living with gout varies from around 1% to about just under 7%, depending on the country and the population that has been studied. Gout's caused by something called uric acid or urate in the blood. And when levels of urate become too high and they stay too high, that can lead to monosodium urate crystals, so needle-shaped crystals forming in and around joints. And it's these crystals that can lead to the classic symptom that we see with gout, which is gout flares or gout attacks. And I'm sure many of the people perhaps living with gout that are in the seminar have, can relate to this. But gout flares are extremely painful. They come on really quickly, and the joint gets very red, hot, and very tender. So that's classically what a gout flare is, and it often affects the foot and often the big toe in the foot, but it can also affect the midfoot and also other parts of the body, so sort of knees, elbows, ankles, so other parts as well. Now, gout quite often affects just one joint at a time. But if gout's not effectively managed, over time we can see that we can get gout attacks or gout flares in more than one joint. Also, flares can become more severe as well, and they can lead to chronic or longer term joint damage. And also, um, as people have been living with gout for longer and it's not been effectively managed, you can get those monosodium urate crystals forming under the skin and forming something called tophi. Yeah. And they look like sort of white lumps under the skin. So that can be in kind of the fingers, toes, ears, and different parts of the body. So, the crystals forming not just in joints as well. It's also, well, we're talking about what gout is, worth pointing out that gout's also linked with other medical conditions as well. So an increasing risk of other medical conditions. So things like high blood pressure, chronic kidney disease, and cardiovascular disease, so heart disease and strokes as well. So so that's kind of what gout is really. And it's probably worth mentioning that there's a lot of stereotype and misconception that gout's just caused by an overindulgent lifestyle, so eating and drinking too much. But there are other things that cause gout as well, and other things that can affect it. And we'll probably talk more about that in a while as well.
Yes.
So
the disease of the riches, isn't it?
Yeah. Disease, it's had this stereotype of sort of the disease of kings or a rich man's disease. And, there are other things other things that cause it, which I'm sure we'll talk about.
And I think the classic picture or the painting was this little devil thing, munching on someone's big toe, wasn't it?
Yeah. Which it's an old-fashioned picture, but it just shows how painful, how painful gout attacks, gout flares, as I will probably tend to call them, can be, and really, really painful.
Because I remember, I think it was a few years back at clinic, somebody who just sort of like had a really bad gout attack, and how he described to me, and now I don't know how he actually knows this, but he said that it is actually on par with childbirth. And and that sort of like would be able to give you that sort of magnitude, how painful that it could be. And then sometimes, people would just, find it really difficult, to manage that. And I do absolutely understand, to that extent why. Now, you have mentioned earlier something called uric acid, and I know some people, learning about this condition, no doubt will come across another term called purine as well.
Yeah.
Is it possible that you could sort of decipher the definition of this too, please?
Yeah, I can certainly tell you a bit more about purines and about uric acid. So, purines are a biological compound, and our bodies make purines naturally. And also, purines can be found in certain food and drink as well. So, some examples of food and drink that contain sort of higher amounts of purine include meat, seafood, alcohol. So, particularly kind of beer that contains the purine guanosine. And purines in the body are broken down through different stages to release uric acid. And I'll talk more in a minute about what uric acid is. So purines are broken down to produce uric acid. Now, there are some research studies that show that eating larger pure amounts of purine-containing foods was linked with an increased risk of getting gout. so getting gout originally or being diagnosed with gout. And there are some research studies that show that eating or drinking larger quantities of purine containing food and drink are linked with an increased risk of a gout flare as well. But it's worth mentioning that those studies are what we call observational. So they're following people over time and seeing what happens to them. So there's a lack and a deficit of evidence from really well-designed research studies showing the effectiveness of reducing those purines in managing gout, really. And there's a lack of what we call randomized control trials, so really good studies where perhaps people have changed their diet to change their purine intake, and that's compared to a group of people that haven't changed their diet as well. So that's what purines are, but they're not the whole story regarding gout, and they're not the whole story in terms of what can make uric acid high in our blood as well. So I'm glad you've asked me about uric acid, because I think it is important to think about what uric acid is and why it might be high as well. So uric acid is a weak acid, but it's in the form urate when it's in our blood, which is why I'll probably tend to refer to it as urate. And when I've mentioned before, but when urate levels become high in the blood and they stay high, then that's when the uric acid or the urate can start to form into crystals of monosodium urate. And those crystals, as I said before, they're like really sharp needles, and they form in and around joints. And it's when some of those crystals shed from where they are into the joint space, and they're detected by the body's immune system, that can lead to an inflammatory reaction, inflammatory processes, and that's when you get a gout flare, and that's when you see all those symptoms caused by that crystal shedding and then it going into the joint, and you get all the inflammatory reaction, which is the pain, the swelling, the tenderness, and the heat in the joint. So that's why having a high level of uric acid or urate is a problem, because it will form crystals and cause those problems. But 90% of the cause of those high uric acid levels is not to do with purines in food or the purines our body naturally make. 90% of that high uric acid levels are actually because of our body not clearing urate well enough from the body, so not getting rid or not clearing enough. And there are lots of things that are linked to our body not clearing or removing enough urate that are linked to those high levels of urate and to risk of getting gout in the first place. So I don't know if it's helpful if I just mention some of those things, Martin.
Yes, please.
Yes. So things like being male increases your risk of getting gout, and that's because the female hormone estrogen can increases how much urate is removed from the body as well. But also other things that can cause that high urate level include, a tendency towards gout in certain people of certain ethnicities or family backgrounds, also genetics as well. But also certain medical conditions as well can predispose you to that high level of urate, make you more likely to have a high urate level. So that's things like living with obesity, perhaps chronic kidney disease, high blood pressure, so quite a few different medical conditions, and also some medications as well. So certain high blood pressure medications and certain diuretics or water tablets as well. But obviously that's not a reason to change your medications at all, but that's just for information. So it's worth appreciating, like we said at the beginning, that there's other things that might cause high uric acid levels.
And does that high uric acid level eventually it will cause gout?
Yeah, so I mean, people can live with high uric acid levels, um, but it is the cause of gout. So I'm not saying that everybody with high urate levels will get gout,
Mm.
um, uh, but that's the cause of forming the crystals and
Yes.
all the
Mm.
symptoms that we see. Yeah,
So it just eventually you get the crystal is just something extra inside your joint fluid. And this
yeah,
is the thing that is
yeah,
going to can ultimately cause
yeah,
the problem.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, so what actually causes a gout attack?
Okay, yeah. So a gout attack or a flare. So just recapping on what a gout attack is or a gout flare is. So that's
Yeah,
when, as you've just said, the some of the crystal is shed, it moves into the joint space, and then it's more easily detected by our body's immune system. And then the immune system will cause that inflammatory reaction. So that's what an actual flare is. That's why we see the symptoms that we see. In terms of what causes that, then when the crystals start to dissolve, or if there's partial um, dissolving of the crystals, or some of them start to dissolve, it's easier for those crystals to shed. And then it's easier for the body's immune system to recognize them and, cause that inflammatory reaction. So things that cause the crystals to start to dissolve can make you more likely to have a flare because of that. So changes or fluctuations in your uric acid levels can make your crystals start to shed as well. So that's why when people start on medications or other things that help to reduce their urate level, um, people may experience a flare. Um, and the reason for that is the medications that are, so I think we call them urate lowering therapy, and they're meant to reduce our urate, and we want them to reduce our urate
yeah.
because by reducing the urate, it helps those crystals that are causing all the problems to dissolve. And then by lowering our urate level, dissolving the crystals, it can help to prevent future flares, and it can help to prevent chronic damage, joint damage, and it can also help to shrink those tophi, the monosodium urate crystals under the skin. But so we do want those urate lowering medications to lower the levels of urate, but because they help to dissolve the crystals, which is what we want, it can make the crystals more likely to shed and then cause a flare and then cause a flare. So that's why we might see sort of a flare if somebody starts on urate lowering medication, but long term we want the crystals to dissolve and to prevent future flares. But there is a degree of uncertainty about what causes flares, and also things like temperatures might be involved, or kind of trauma, or sort of damage to the joint as well. But there's a degree of uncertainty on actually what's causing flares.
Yes, because I do remember somebody once said to me that when they have been started on the urate lowering therapy, they were on aripiprazole, and all of a sudden they got this almighty flare, and they
Mm.
just questioning whether is the medication is not helping them. And I guess that this is exactly what you have answered, because
It,
it is actually breaking down
it's
of
really
the
helping. It just
mm,
short term.
yes, yes,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So it's not something that if you please don't feel that allopurinol is not helping you. It's just only that that moment in time that is causing this, and then but in the longer term, there is likely going to be of benefit.
Mm.
Yes.
And some people might want to speak to their healthcare professional about pain relief or medication they can take at the same, while start allopurinol, but that's a discussion for
yes, but yeah, to the
really.
physicians, yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, I have read in a paper some time ago, and then this is really, really, interest me, and now I've got an expert in front of me. I'm just going to ask this question. So, why do urate or uric acid crystals gravitate to a joint which is prone to arthritis, especially osteoarthritis?
Okay, so yeah, so one theory is that the monosodium urate crystals form in the damage in cartilage in a joint with osteoarthritis. So cartilage is the material at
The
the
waxy
end of the
layer.
bone, yeah, the end of the bone in the joint. So one theory is that monosodium urate crystals form in damaged cartilage, and there's possibly other biological processes involved as well to do with a joint with osteoarthritis. Um, but it's just one theory, and you can get monosodium urate crystals forming in joints that aren't as affected as much by osteoarthritis, like the elbow as well. So it's not, the osteoarthritis and the cartilage isn't the whole story really. Just one thought.
Okay, so there is quite multifactorial, really. There's
Yeah.
no sort of like one answer to it, but I guess that it could also relate it to, the sort of sometimes I think is the charges or within the actual crystals, with it something to do with, the electrical side of things, or am I just thinking a complete different tangent?
Yeah, I mean, so the main reason why crystals form is because the concentration of urate's got so high that there's a
So
higher
yeah. Mm.
concentration there. Um, and other things that might be involved with sort of crystal formation are things like temperature and things like that as well. But yeah, so the osteoarthritis is probably just one
I
thing.
guess that, it traces back to, how we used to grow crystals when we in our science class.
Yeah, yes, I was talking about that last week with somebody actually. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it
If
is
you
it's
think, yeah,
exactly the same. So you just, if the concentration is high, you are likely going to, stand a much higher chance in forming those crystals. Yeah, I guess that, that's the reason why controlling the blood urate is so important.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, yeah, I agree.
Okay. How can people living with gout manage this disease by modifying their diet?
Oh, so I have got a few slides that I will
Oh,
share my
please
screen
do.
and let people do. But before I mention that, talk about sort of diet really. It's just to highlight kind of what we mean by management of gout and long-term management. So long-term management of gout is, getting that level of urate level down. So and we've mentioned a few of these things, getting that level of urate down so we can prevent future flares, and also so we can prevent chronic joint damage and help to shrink those tophi. Also, management involves preventing and managing medical conditions linked to gout as well. So things like cardiovascular disease, heart disease, strokes, yeah, kidney disease, managing blood pressure as well. So that's what we mean when we're talking about gout management. Before I talk about diet, it's the really good news is that there is effective medication management as well. So we mustn't forget about that. And there is medication to help lower urate that I've mentioned before. So urate lowering medication. So examples are allopurinol or febuxostat. And those medications help to lower that level of urate in the blood. Um, and I don't know if people have heard of something called treat to target, but there's guidelines recommending that when people are started on urate lowering therapy like allopurinol, that dose is gradually increased over time with the support of a healthcare professional to aim at achieve a target level of blood urate. So that's a level of 360 micromoles per litre. Yeah. So that's the target. It might be lower, it might be 300 for some people with more severe gout and some chronic damage, and if they're still getting flares on that 360.
Yeah, that's the standard, isn't it? 360 mils.
Yeah. So just wanted to mention that before, and before we talk about diet, because there is good evidence that urate lowering medication can get your urate levels down. Whereas, as we'll talk about in a few minutes, kind of the evidence in terms of sort of diet and lifestyle in the management of gout, there's more uncertainty as well. So just thought I'd mention that before I start sharing screens.
Oh, please do, Lorraine.
Okay, so can you see my slide?
Yeah.
On there? Yeah. So hopefully, so hopefully people can see a very nice picture of where I work, which is Keele Hall at Keele University in Staffordshire. Can you see that slide, Martin?
I can, yes.
Yeah, brilliant. That's great. So some of this we've already mentioned, but really what I'm talking about on these slides is just for information purposes, and it's not to replace any advice you might have been given by a healthcare professional, and really just that I'm sharing my own views as well. So I thought, since we're talking about diet and lifestyle, it's helpful to talk about some guidelines and some recommendations. So the information I'm going to share on the next screen is from the European League Against Rheumatism, recommendations regarding lifestyle behaviours to prevent the progression of rheumatic and musculoskeletal diseases. And they undertook 6 reviews of evidence, and they included gout as one of the conditions that they looked at. And then also NICE guidelines. So, and that's the guidelines for gout diagnosis and management. And it's just worth mentioning that the NICE guidelines do recommend that after a gout flare has settled, that somebody's lifestyle is assessed, and also the risk of what we call comorbidity, so other medical conditions, is assessed. So by other medical conditions, we mean things like heart disease and kidney disease. So both those recommend, both the EULAR and the NICE guidelines refer to weight. The NICE guidelines say to advise people that living with excess body weight or living with obesity might exacerbate flares or symptoms, so might make flares worse. And the EULAR recommendations are for people to aim to be a healthy weight. And to, if somebody's overweight, to work with a healthcare professional to lose weight in a controlled and intentional way. And that includes kind of looking at their healthy eating and a balanced diet and physical activity. Both the recommendations from EULAR and NICE also refer to alcohol, and NICE say to advise people with gout that excessive amounts of alcohol may make flares or symptoms worse. And also EULAR talk about how having moderate amounts of alcohol may make flares more likely to have a flare as well.
Is that the alcohol you do on its own, or is the dehydration that is the issue?
Yeah, so we probably, I mean, I'll talk more about alcohol in a moment, but I think both of those things are important as part of a balanced diet and a balanced, healthy lifestyle approach is drinking plenty. And the studies that they were referring to were about alcohol increasing the risk of flares. But again, they were observational again, but I'll talk more about those. But drinking plenty of the right kind of fluids, so low sugar drinks, or I've got some examples later, is important. Yeah, so they both highlight alcohol, and I've got some slides talking about alcohol in a little while. And then both of those guidelines recommend a healthy, balanced diet, and I'll speak more about that in a moment. But both NICE and EULAR talk about how there's a lack of evidence regarding any specific diet or any specific foods in the management of gout. And I've taken some of the wording from some of the guidelines. So NICE say to explain to people with gout that there's not enough evidence to show that any specific diet prevents flares, so any specific kind of foods. And EULAR say that more or less of specific food types is unlikely to have large benefits on outcomes. And by outcomes, they mean things like flares and serum urate level. And this wording's from EULAR, and it's just highlighting what I mentioned before when we're talking about purines, which is while a high intake of purines in the diet is a risk factor for getting gout in the first place, there's little clinical trial data on the efficacy or the effectiveness of changing your purine intake and modifying lifestyle for gout as well. So that's important to appreciate. And we've said before about kind of, the lack of randomized control trials or the better quality trials. And then just EULAR refer to exercise in their recommendations, and they're just saying, talking about the benefits of exercise, where people are able in terms of pain relief, quality of life, and talking about aerobic exercise, and we'll talk more about that in a little while, and strengthening as well. But there was a lack of studies actually about exercise and gout. And overall, I suppose the summary is that there's a current evidence base to support any specific dietary intervention is quite limited. And as we've said a few times, more high quality studies are needed. So
quite so useful just to dispelling some of the myths that we have seen, let's say that from social media, or even some popular diet books. They all talked about, cut out, all your little meat and, animal protein. And this is quite common, actually.
Yeah. And we would say, and we'll talk more about this in a minute, but we'd say as part of a good balanced diet and preventing some of the conditions that are linked with gout and that other people without gout can get, like heart disease, type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, then kind of not eating too much meat, watching our portions, eating plenty of vegetables and things is really good for preventing lots of other medical conditions.
Yes, absolutely.
But there's a lack of very specific changes or foods causing flares and things. Lack of evidence for that.
I'm glad that you mentioned that.
yeah. So and it's that the studies, there haven't been good quality studies to prove it. Yeah. So not saying that there isn't a role there, but we just don't have the evidence to say if that makes sense.
Yes.
So I know not everybody living with gout is overweight or is living with obesity, but I often get asked about weight. So I've just got a few points here. So living with obesity is associated or linked with double the risk of incident gout. By incident gout, we mean getting gout in the first place, really getting diagnosed with gout. And also weight gain over time is associated with an increased risk of getting gout as well. And there was a review study back in 2017 that found that there was low to moderate quality evidence of the beneficial effects of weight loss on urate levels, so uric acid levels, achieving that target urate level that we talked about, and also on gout flares. But they highlighted, as we've just said, the need for more rigorous studies following people over time, especially those randomized control trials where people, one people perhaps get advice and support to change the diet, and other people don't get that advice. And this year, actually, there's been a study that's just shown a trend towards a reduction in blood urate when people have lost weight as well. So what I always get asked is why or how might weight be involved? And it's worth appreciating that obesity is considered a condition of chronic low-grade inflammation. And what I mean by that is when if we're living with obesity, then because of the fat cells in the body promoting inflammation, it means that we've got low level, long lasting inflammation there because of the fat cells. And so adipose tissue or fat cells is linked to promoting inflammation. And also the adipose tissue and also the visceral fat. So that's the fat that's around the organs. So it's the yellow fat that's nearest the internal organs in the picture there. Higher levels of visceral fat have been linked with higher levels of serum urate in the blood as well. And also insulin might play a part as well. So insulin resistance is when our body doesn't respond to insulin in the way that it should do. And higher levels of insulin resistance has been linked with not clearing enough urate from the body as well, and higher levels of urate. So there's a few things that might be linked. And the other reason we talk about weight with a gout, and actually for all conditions really, is that living with overweight or obesity is linked with other medical conditions that I've mentioned, such as heart disease, high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes. And I won't go through this in lots of detail, but I tend to always get asked what a healthy weight is. So I've just put a reminder and some link to some online calculators. So BMI can be used to give an indication of a healthy weight, and it's your weight in kilograms divided by height in meters squared. So a BMI below 18.5 would be classed as underweight, 18.5 to 24.9 normal weight, 25 to 29.9 overweight, and then for somebody with a BMI of 30 or higher, they would be considered to be living with obesity. And the reason that we think about healthy weight is that living with obesity and overweight, but also being too underweight, can increase the risk of different medical conditions. But measuring around our waist is also important, and I'll mention that in a moment. With BMI, it's just worth considering that if you're from one of the family backgrounds here, that we do use lower thresholds because of the higher risk at the higher BMI of different medical conditions. So, and I've just put those there. So overweight would be 23 to 27.4. Living with obesity would be over 27.5. And BMI can be really helpful, but it is quite a crude measure, and it's not telling us how much of our body weight is muscle, fat, or fluid. So we do interpret it with a bit of caution, and it's not necessarily suitable for all. And then just to highlight that the NICE guidelines for obesity identification and assessment and management have recommended that with adults with a BMI below 35, measuring around the waist and comparing it to the height is a good idea, and trying to get that measurement of your waist so it's less, so it's half of your height. So one question I get asked a lot is where to measure. So if you take the bottom of your ribs and the top of your hip bone and you find the point halfway between those, and then measure around your waist at that point. And you're trying to get your waist measurement to half of that of your height, or 0.5, and that's just really been recommended because it's a practical estimate of how much what we call central obesity or central adiposity, so fat around the center of the body, we have, and how that might relate to risk as well. So that, just wanted to touch on weight. And also, I know not everybody with gout drinks alcohol, and I've met lots of people that have said, "Oh, I've never touched a drop," but I do often get asked about alcohol, so I thought I'd mention that. And alcohol is higher intakes of alcohol have been associated or linked with an increased risk of getting gout. And also, higher intakes of alcohol have been associated with increased risk of getting a flare as well. But both of those points relate to those observational studies that I've mentioned when we're just following people over time. So how might alcohol be involved? Well, it's not just purines and the fact that alcohol's got some purines in. Also, alcohol might increase the breakdown of purines into uric acid. And also, alcohol can affect the removal of urate from the kidneys as well. So that's how it might be involved. And as I've said before, sort of limiting alcohol as benefits for general health and prevention of other medical conditions as well. And I know this will make a lot of people will know this, but it's just a reminder, because I have spoken to a few people recently that still think that 21 units is the amount recommended for men. But the government guidelines recommend that for both men and women to try to not drink more than 14 units of alcohol on a regular basis, and to try to spread out your drinks of alcohol over the week, over 3 or more days. And if you do want to cut down on the amount of alcohol you're drinking, a good way is to have several drink-free days each week. And then I've just put this up as a reminder that the number of alcohols in a drink depends on the size of the drink, but also the percentage alcohol in it, so the strength as well. And also, and this slide, I've just shown a part of the website from DrinkAware, and it's just to make the point that alcohol can also be a source of calories as well, which I think sometimes we forget. So by limiting our alcohol, that can also help to cut out on empty calories. And then just the NICE guidelines and other guidelines recommend kind of a healthy, balanced diet. I'm sure some people have seen this already, but that's the government's guidelines on the Eat Well plate, and things that can be important to think about when you're eating a balanced diet. So having plenty of vegetables, choosing whole grain or higher fibre versions of carbohydrate foods, things like eating more beans or pulses, and eating less processed or red meats, and choosing sort of lower fat, lower sugar versions as well. There's also some other things to think about as part of a balanced diet, and one that's important is it's recommended that our intake of free sugars, so added sugars, is less than 5% of our total dietary energy intake. So in other words, a really small amount. And free sugars include sugars added to fruit juices, purees, honeys, and syrups. And reducing those free sugars or added sugars is helpful to help prevent weight gain or to help to lose weight if you're trying to lose weight, but also to help prevent things like diabetes, insulin resistance, and other conditions as well. And Martin, we were talking about fluid earlier. So a balanced diet includes drinking plenty, but better options for fluid can be water, low-fat milk, low-sugar drinks, tea and coffees count as well. But limiting fruit juices or smoothies just because of the sugar content, really. And actually, higher intakes of sugar sweetened soft drinks have been linked to high levels of serum urate and also risk of gout as well. And then just generally, I'm sure we all know this, is eating less of foods that are high in fat and sugar and salt, and eating smaller amounts. And then just oils and spreads. So trying to choose unsaturated oils or spreads. So those oils and spreads that are more associated with sort of a Mediterranean style diet, and having monounsaturated options, so things like your olive oil or your rapeseed oil as well. And then just on a practical level, if people are perhaps trying to prevent weight gain or trying to lose weight, a really good starting point is perhaps starting with half of your plate of vegetables, because they're a really great source of fibre to help fill us up, and vitamins and minerals and probiotics, so healthy healthy food for the healthy bacteria in our gut. Yeah, thank you. And also having some protein foods, but maybe better options might be kind of peas, beans and lentils, leaner meat, and then having the whole grain foods. So sort of whole grain or whole fiber varieties of things like potato. Things like jacket potatoes or wholemeal whole grain breads or whole grain pasta, because the half a plate of vegetables doesn't include starchy carbohydrates like potatoes. So that might be a proportion on your plate that you might want to think about. And just generally just wanted to highlight about portions and kind of reflecting on our portion sizes. And portion sizes have increased lots over the years. So the white packet of crisps and the middle size muffin in here were the average portion size back in 1993. And then the larger portions are the average portion size in 2013. So it's just to show how much portions have increased over the years. And I mean, that's 2013. They've probably increased again in the last decade.
I think it's probably gone a little bit smaller, but charge you more expensive.
Yeah, yes, that's a really good point, actually. Yeah, I think we've perhaps done an arc with that, maybe. Yeah. And then I won't go through food labeling in lots of detail, but some people find it helpful when they're trying to pick sort of lower salt things because of the blood pressure or lower sugar or fat things. To look at food labels and to use the traffic light system to try and limit how much of the red and amber they're picking, or even just to compare products as well. But it's also, it's always worth thinking about the portion size, because sometimes the portion sizes that they state on labels and it is perhaps different to what we're consuming. And there are lots of different resources that can help with eating a balanced diet and healthy eating. I've just put an example of the Better Health NHS like food scanner app. Because food labeling can be confusing, and that's just an example of one thing that might help. So to find out what's inside a food, and it'll suggest swaps as well. And I just put physical activity just before I finish, but I won't go through this in lots of detail, but it's just to highlight the government's chief medical officers recommendations for physical activity where people are able. So it's keeping active, building strength, minimizing a sedentary time, so how much we're sitting, improving balance as well. And they all can have benefits generally for our well-being, but also preventing different medical conditions as well. So just final thoughts on management. Really, there's limited evidence for any specific diet or specific food in the management of gout, as I mentioned from those guidelines. But there are potential benefits in terms of managing our weight, eating an overall balanced diet, moving more, limiting our alcohol, and also their benefits for the medical conditions that people living with gout may go on to get or may be living with as well. So things like heart disease I mentioned, and high blood pressure. So that was all I wanted to talk about management. I didn't know whether you wanted me to mention I've literally got 2 slides just about the research that we're doing at the moment, Martin, but we can come back to that.
Go for it.
Yeah, is that okay? So the research study that we've got at the moment is called GOLD, and that is the Gout Lifestyle Intervention Development. And by intervention development, what we mean is we're developing a way of intervening or helping and supporting people to change their lifestyle. So it's the ultimate aim is to develop a lifestyle intervention for people living with gout to support them to change their lifestyle. So the things that this project has involved so far has been what we call a scoping review. So I went away and looked at all existing research, and the reason I did that was to try and find things that might help or not help people with gout to change their lifestyle. So things that might or might not help people to change things like their diet, alcohol, and physical activity. And the other thing that we did is we interviewed people living with gout, GPs, primary care nurses, primary care dietitians, and health and wellbeing coaches, which is a job in primary care where people coach people to make lifestyle changes. And we interviewed those people in with gout and those different healthcare professionals to try and find out what their views are on lifestyle interventions in gout. And as well as doing that, I'm so grateful because we've had a PPIE group, and I've got a slide on the next. My next slide is explaining what that is. So PPIE group, and which is a group of people with experience of either having gout themselves or a family member having gout. And then a stakeholder group, which is a group of different healthcare professionals and also people living with gout. And they have both, throughout this process, shared their experiences and their thoughts and their views on the research that we're doing. So they've got to hear some of the findings and shared what they thought, and also sharing what they think about what this intervention might be as well. So I've been asked before kind of how people can get involved in being a PPIE or patient and public involvement and engagement member. So I've got my colleague's email address there. So I mean, we have another meeting soon about this lifestyle project and about gout, but we also have PPIE meetings about other medical conditions and research in other areas. So, other forms of arthritis as well. So if anybody would like to come to be a PPIE member and come to meetings where you can hear a bit more about the research and share your thoughts on the research, please just drop my colleague Alice, Dr. Alice Malt, an email. She knows that I've put her information up here, and she can direct you to perhaps a group that might be helpful. So, for example, for the project that I lead, which is the gout intervention development, we have online meetings, so anybody can join from in the UK, and we've got a meeting next week as well. So if anybody's interested, that's Alice's email. And I just, before I finish, I just wanted to say how grateful I am for the people that we interviewed, because I said we interviewed people living with gout and healthcare professionals. So I always like to say thank you to those people, and also thank you to the people that come to our groups, like the PPIE groups, and also the other people involved in the project, sort of supervisors and collaborators, and the people who funded it, the NIHR School for Primary Care. And I think that's it of my slides. So I'll stop sharing now.
Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Lorraine, for giving up your time, and there's lots of information to unpack there for those that were listening. We've got a few minutes now, and there have been a few questions come in through the Q&A panel. Some of it, I think I've got 3 here, and some that we'll try and respond to following the webinar. So, so for those that have asked those questions, please be patient. So. The first one is having rheumatoid arthritis and osteoarthritis. Is that a risk factor for having gout or future?
Yeah. So the osteoarthritis, yes, because there is evidence that you've got an increased risk of getting gout for osteoarthritis. Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. And the next question. So, for women after menopause, where there's a tendency to gain that central body fat, does that indicate an increased risk of gout as well?
Sorry, I got distracted because I started getting a telephone call from that. Could you repeat that question?
Yeah.
Sorry.
So sort of, I guess women after menopause, where there's a tendency to for sort of the increase to increase or to gain central body fat, does that indicate an increased risk of gout?
Yeah, so it's two-pronged really. So if you, after the menopause, when you've got less of the estrogen, that can be a risk factor for gout, and that's why gout becomes your risk increases after the menopause. So partly it's to do with the hormone, but yes, partly we think that the amount of central obesity, or the weight around the waist, can increase risk as well. So it's kind of two-pronged really. But the good news is, if particularly with the weight, some of the things that we've talked about that can help in terms of physical activity and balanced diet and things like that.
All right, thank you. So this might be a question for both as well. So is there an evidence of a relationship with the gut microbiome?
Yeah, so there are some. I wouldn't want to comment on the quality of the evidence, but there's some thoughts about how we excrete. Our kidneys do the majority of the work, and the lion's share of the work removing urate from the body, but some is removed from our digestive system as well. So having a healthy gut is probably a good idea from that point of view. And there is certain changes that happen with serum urate and the biome as well, that with some studies have reported, but I wouldn't say there's lots of evidence in that area. I think that's perhaps something that could be maybe researched more in the future.
Fantastic, thank you. Yeah, that's the end of the questions. So thank you, Lorraine, for giving up your precious time to come along to the Arthritis Action webinar today.
Thank you, Lorraine.
So this is the end of this is this is the end of the talk, and but before everyone leaves, would like, if you'd like more information on arthritis, please visit our website at www.arthritis.org.uk. We have got a number of useful resources that will help you self-manage your condition, including detailed information on exercises, dietary information, well-being resources, and tips on staying connected. A video of this webinar will be made available shortly on our YouTube channel, and we will send you an email once that link's available on the channel and on the website as well. So all that's left for me is to say a big thank you, and thank you to Lorraine, thank you for Martin, and thank you for our attendees that have come along today to listen to this webinar. We hope you found it really useful and really informative, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thanks. Goodbye.
Thanks,
Thank you, Terry.
Thank you.